rarely ever think about submarines, unless in sandwich form. Sure, submarines keep themselves intentionally out of mind, being mostly underwater and whatnot, although sometimes yellow and occupied by the Beatles. It's just pop culture of the 80s was rather void of submarines. There were a handful of movies, but few of them mainstream. You had Das Boot, a popular German film released in 1982, and then a gap of not a whole lot until The Hunt for Red October in 1990. And that movie has its own NES game. You could say that the NES is lousy with military-inspired video games, from flight sims to tactical strategy games and from beat-em-ups to shooters, but when it comes to charting open seas and sinking enemy ships with torpedoes, there's very few of those experiences on the NES. Enter Silent Service, a port of Sid Meier's 8-bit computer submarine simulation. Sid Meier is responsible for most of my childhood thanks to Civilization series and his multitude of other simulation titles that have as much an emphasis on realism as they do tongue-in-cheek humor. Silent Service on the NES is about as far removed from humor as it can be, but is it a good game? Well, let's see what's up.
In Silent Service, the submarine simulation video game from Ultra. First, you gotta find them. Then, if you're up to the challenge, you gotta get them in range. And if you're good enough, you'll put them on the ocean floor and live to tell about it. Find them, chase them, sink them in Ultra's Silent Service, the submarine simulation for Nintendo that puts you in command.
If you have an insatiable passion for submarines and some knowledge of naval warfare, then you have a slight advantage over most folks who try their hand at Silent Service. The point of the game is right in the manual. Find them, chase them, sink them. That's about all there is to it, in concept at least. You can select from 3 options in this single-player simulation experience. You can practice firing torpedoes and guns. You can commit to some small-scale convoy scenarios by controlling a single submarine, or you can go war patrolling and command multiple vessels. The setting for this game is the South Pacific during World War II, and you can set your subs out to sea from Midway Island, Brisbane, or Fremantle, Australia. After you pick the scenario you want to try, you'll be greeted by other menu options for fine-tuning your experience. You can choose whether or not to include random effects like dud torpedoes, and whether you can repair your vessel while under attack. You can select your difficulty on a wide scale that ranges from 1, the easiest, all the way up to 9. You'll likely need the manual handy when playing Silent Service to get the hang of not just how to control your subs, but when you should control them. There are some different views that allow for specific commands. You can think of it all as working from a centralized menu, which would be this view of you in the conning tower. Oddly, you look less like a Navy officer and more like a data analyst. Maybe this is supposed to be Sid Meier himself, or even Steven Spielberg playing a solo game of Risk. Here in the conning tower, you can access the periscope, the map, a view of the ship and its damaged areas, and a control panel with lights and doohickeys. The control panel has actual meaningful information on it, but its usefulness in battle is debatable. Looking at the map will let you zoom in and out on your sub so you can see where you are in the vast ocean, or zoom in to see how close those enemy vessels are. In the convoy scenarios, you're a lone sea wolf, so you'll need a strategy for how to wipe out multiple enemies without getting yourself sunk in the process. From this view, you can guide the sub's heading and speed as well as depth. Sink beneath the surface to remain undetected while you creep up, but you won't be able to use the periscope to look around until you rise near the water surface. When you engage an enemy, it's a good idea to pop over to the periscope for a peek. It's also worth noting that to play Silent Service effectively as one player, you still need to use 2 controllers. You can hold 2 controllers at once pretty easily if you believe in yourself, although it's still a brain trip to get the hang of. The reason for using both is that you'll need one controller's D-pad for steering the sub's heading, or direction it's going, and the other controller's D-pad to change the periscope's bearing, or direction you're looking. You can be heading north and need to look east, for example, and the 2-controller setup allows you to adjust both in the moment. This is necessary for 2 reasons. The first is so you don't collide with anything while you're peeking around with the periscope, and more importantly, it's for your weapons. You're packing a limited number of torpedoes and an unlimited amount of machine gun bullets. Your torpedoes can fire directly from the bow or the aft, so straight ahead or directly behind the submarine, regardless of which direction you're looking through the periscope. Thankfully, the game automatically picks which direction to shoot from, based on enemy placement, or we'd probably have to bring a 3rd controller into the mix. All these controls for an NES game make it easy to understand why the inside of a real submarine is 92% buttons and switches. Anyway, your machine gun fire depends on where you're aiming the reticle of the periscope. So, regardless of your heading, you can fire machine gun bullets in any direction. It's tricky to get the hang of at first, especially since you'll need to estimate the distance away your enemies are to effectively land machine gun fire on them. To be most effective, you'll want to use the two weapon types intermixed. Since torpedoes are limited, it's good to hit a ship with one to do some heavy initial damage and then use your machine guns to finish it off. One interesting thing about this game is that you can fake your demise if you find yourself in a pickle. Holding down A on the second controller will release debris and oil to the surface that may convince enemies you've been sunk, and, if nothing else, it will convince all the nearby sea life that you're a jerk. There's also no music outside of the title theme. The audio for the game itself is mostly sound effects ranging from this notch above brown note hum to this lovely rendition of a submarine's engine that drones on endlessly. According to the Cutting Room Floor website, there were at least 9 unused tracks for this game. Given the slow pace of naval combat and the long periods of inactivity that comes with it, having some music to keep you company could have gone a long way. If we wanted to get into every nuance of silent service, we'd be here all day. Frankly, Sid Meier doesn't skimp on the details, and he didn't back in 1985 either. Generally speaking, to play this one, you'll need to do your own prep work with the manual and actually use the practice mode to learn how everything works together. The basic premise of the game is what I've shown you. Find them, chase them, sink them. For convoy missions, that can be over quickly. For war patrol scenarios, that can take a long time, depending on how lucky you get on the find them part. Silent Service is good at what it does, but your enjoyment with this one will depend on how much of what it does you're interested in. It's not so in-depth that it's overwhelming, but it can take a while to figure out before any fun is had, so just keep that in mind. Silent Service 2 released on PCs in 1990 and was highly regarded in the day. It's an overall upgrade to the original with better graphics, more in-depth control of the vessel, and more elaborate campaigns to take on. Well, that's going to do it for Silent Service on the NES. As always, keep the oceans clean, and thanks for watching.